Hey guys, tonight we begin with perhaps the most unfortunate, degrading, and downright nauseating position in all of human history, the royal butt wiper. Yes, you heard that right. Someone actually got paid to clean the royal posterior, and trust me, no amount of gold could make this job worth it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, you want to be a royal butt wiper? Actually, no. Nobody wants this job. This isn't something you apply for with a carefully crafted resume, highlighting your posterior cleaning experience. This is something that happens to you like being struck by lightning or accidentally insulting the wrong nobleman's wife. Most royal butt wipers didn't start their careers thinking, you know what would really fulfill me? Intimate knowledge of royal bowel movements and the privilege of cleaning up after them. No, this was typically the result of being born into the wrong family at exactly the wrong time in history. You see, the position of royal butt wiper, formerly known as the Groom of the Stool, or sometimes the Gentleman of the Privy Chamber, wasn't just handed out to random peasants off the street. Oh no, that would be too simple. This prestigious honor was actually reserved for members of the nobility. That's right. You could be born into wealth, privilege, and a fancy title, only to discover that your family's traditional role in court was literally wiping the king's backside. Imagine explaining that at medieval dinner parties. Oh, what do I do for a living? Well, I ensure His Majesty's posterior remains spotless. It's a family tradition. The job typically fell to younger sons of noble families, those unfortunate enough to be born second or third in line for inheritance. Your older brother gets the castle, and lands you get a silk cloth and the intimate knowledge of your sovereign's digestive schedule. It's like a twisted version of royal succession where instead of inheriting power, you inherit the privilege of being uncomfortably close to royal waste. And unlike other court positions where you might occasionally get a day off, the royal posterior doesn't take holidays. When nature calls the king, you'd better be ready to answer, whether it's 3 a.m. or during a state dinner with foreign dignitaries. Sometimes the position was hereditary, passed down from father to son like a family curse wrapped in velvet. Son, someday, all this will be yours, your father would say, gesturing not to vast estates, but to a collection of fine linens and an intimate knowledge of royal bathroom habits. Other times it was a political appointment, a way for kings to humiliate rival nobles by forcing them into the most degrading service imaginable. You challenged my authority. Congratulations. You are now in charge of my bathroom needs for the next decade. And here's the truly twisted part about this position: it was actually considered an honor. In the warped hierarchy of medieval courts, being trusted with the king's most vulnerable moments was seen as a sign of incredible favor and trust. You weren't just any servant. You were the servant who knew the king's most intimate secrets, who was present during his most private moments, who could literally claim to know him better than anyone else in the kingdom. It was proximity to power in the most literal and unfortunate sense possible. But let's be honest about what this really meant. While other courtiers got to discuss matters of state military strategy or diplomatic relations, your conversations with the king revolved around fiber intake, digestive comfort, and the occasional urgent summons that had nothing to do with affairs of state and everything to do with affairs of the bowel. You became less of a nobleman and more of a highly educated bathroom attendant with a fancy title, and probably some very expensive clothes that you definitely didn't want to think too hard about washing. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, including the poor souls trapped in this position. Here you were potentially one of the most educated, well-born individuals in the kingdom, and your primary job responsibility was ensuring that royal waste didn't end up anywhere it shouldn't be. You might speak 3 languages, understand complex political theories, and be capable of managing vast estates. But when the king called, you dropped everything and rushed to attend to needs that had nothing to do with your intellect, and everything to do with your willingness to handle situations that would make most people flee the country, and the job came with absolutely no dignity whatsoever. You couldn't even pretend it was about something else. A knight could say he served the crown in battle. A diplomat could claim he negotiated peace. A scholar could boast about preserving knowledge. But you served the crown by ensuring it remained clean during its most undignified moments. There was no spinning this into something noble or heroic. You were quite literally the person who dealt with royal shit, and everyone knew it. Your entire existence at court revolved around one person's bathroom schedule, and that person happened to be the most powerful individual in the kingdom. This meant that your day wasn't structured around normal court activities like ceremonies, councils, or diplomatic meetings. No, your schedule was entirely dependent on the royal digestive system, which, as anyone who's ever been human can tell you, doesn't operate on a predictable timetable. You might be enjoying a rare moment of peace when suddenly a page comes running with the urgent news that His Majesty requires your immediate assistance. And when the king calls for bathroom help, you don't get to finish your meal, complete your conversation, or even put on proper clothes. You drop everything and run because royal bowel movements wait for no one. The unpredictability was perhaps the worst part. Unlike other court positions where you might have some sense of routine, your job was entirely at the mercy of royal biology. A rich feast the night before meant you'd be earning your salary repeatedly the next day. A period of royal illness meant you'd be working overtime with materials that were definitely not mentioned in any job description. And if the king decided to travel, you traveled too, because digestive needs don't pause for royal processions or diplomatic missions. You became intimately familiar with the bathroom facilities of every castle, manor, and lodging house in the kingdom. Not as a guest, but as someone who needed to know the layout for professional reasons. Even your sleeping arrangements were affected by this job. You couldn't live in some distant part of the castle, or maintain a residence in town like other nobles. No, you needed to be close enough to respond to urgent summons at any hour. This meant your quarters were uncomfortably near the royal chambers, close enough that you could hear when your services might be needed, which meant you were also close enough to hear everything else that went on in the royal bedroom. Privacy was a luxury you simply didn't have, and neither did the king. When you were around, you existed in this strange liminal space where you were neither fully part of the royal household nor entirely separate from it. Too important to ignore, but too embarrassing to acknowledge in polite company. The psychological toll of this position was probably immense. Though historical records don't tend to focus on the mental health of royal bathroom attendants, imagine trying to maintain your dignity and sense of self-worth when your primary value to society was your willingness to handle the most undignified aspects of human existence. You were educated, noble-born, potentially quite intelligent, but your claim to fame was your expertise in royal waste management. It's the kind of job that would make anyone question their life choices, their family history, and their prospects for future happiness. And let's talk about the actual mechanics of the job, because this wasn't just a ceremonial position with a gross title. This was hands-on work in the most literal sense possible. In an era before toilet paper, before modern plumbing, before any of the conveniences we take for granted, cleaning someone else's posterior was a complex, multi-step process that required both skill and a very strong stomach. You needed to know which fabrics were most effective, which techniques were most thorough, and how to accomplish everything quickly and efficiently. While maintaining some semblance of royal dignity, the tools of your trade weren't exactly glamorous either. Fine linens, soft cloths, special oils, or waters for cleaning, and various implements that were probably custom-made for royal posterior maintenance. You had to maintain this equipment, ensure it was always clean and ready for use, and replace it regularly. Because, well, some things can't be washed effectively enough for reuse, your quarters probably looked like a very specialized and deeply unsettling medical facility, stocked with supplies that served only one very specific and very unpleasant purpose. But here's where it gets even worse. The job came with social expectations. As a nobleman, you were expected to attend court functions, participate in royal ceremonies, and maintain relationships with other members of the aristocracy, but everyone knew what your primary job was. Imagine trying to make small talk at a royal banquet when everyone in the room knew that your most important daily task involved intimate contact with the king's backside. The jokes wrote themselves, and I guarantee they were making them just not within your earshot. You were simultaneously too important to ignore and too embarrassing to acknowledge existing in a social twilight zone where your noble birth commanded respect, but your job duties inspired disgust and amusement. The job also came with its own unique form of job security, which sounds good until you realize what it actually meant. Once you were appointed as royal butt wiper, you were essentially trapped in the position until the king died. Or there was no lateral movement into other court positions, no opportunities for promotion that would get you away from bathroom duties, and certainly no way to gracefully resign without insulting the crown. You were stuck, sometimes for decades, as the kingdom's most highly educated toilet attendant. And if you did your job well, you might even be rewarded with the privilege of training your replacement, passing on the specialized knowledge and techniques that would ensure the tradition continued long after you were gone. The relationship between the royal butt wiper and the monarch was necessarily intimate in a way that was probably deeply uncomfortable for everyone involved. You knew things about the king that no one else knew, things that were definitely not matters of state, but were certainly matters of very personal biology. You could probably predict the king's mood based on his digestive patterns, knew his dietary preferences based on their end results, and were intimately familiar with any health issues that affected his bathroom habits. This created a strange dynamic where you were simultaneously one of the people closest to the king, and also someone he probably preferred not to think about too much, and the discretion required for this position was absolute. You couldn't gossip about what you observed, couldn't share amusing anecdotes about royal bathroom disasters, and definitely couldn't write memoirs about your unique perspective on monarchy. Everything you experienced in the course of your duties was essentially classified information of the most personal kind. You were expected to be blind, deaf, and mute about everything you witnessed while still being ready to respond immediately to any royal needs. It was like being a highly specialized spy whose mission was to remain invisible while handling the most visible aspects of human biology. The training for this position was probably unlike anything else in the medieval world. There were no schools for royal posterior maintenance, no textbooks on proper technique, no apprenticeship programs that could prepare you for the reality of this job. You learned on the job probably through a combination of trial and error guidance from your predecessor if you were lucky, and the immediate feedback of a monarch who definitely had opinions about your performance. And unlike other jobs where mistakes might be embarrassing or costly, mistakes in this position were immediately obvious, deeply personal, and potentially grounds for dismissal or worse, consider the medical aspects of this role as well. In an era when royal health was a matter of state security, the royal butt wiper was essentially an early warning system for potential health problems. Changes in the king's digestive patterns could signal illness, poison, or other threats to royal well-being. You were expected to notice and report anything unusual, which meant you needed to be intimately familiar with what was normal for the royal digestive system. You were part bathroom attendant, part medical observer, and part security guard, all wrapped up in one deeply unfortunate job description. The political implications of this position were also significant. The person who held this job was necessarily someone the king trusted completely, which meant they often became informal advisors and confidants. But it was advice given in the most undignified circumstances, possible conversations held during moments when both parties were probably trying to pretend this wasn't happening. The royal butt wiper might have significant political influence, but it was influence gained through proximity to royal bodily functions rather than expertise in statecraft or military strategy. And let's not forget the practical challenges of maintaining personal hygiene while performing this job. In an era when bathing was infrequent and soap was a luxury, keeping yourself clean after repeatedly handling someone else's waste was a significant challenge. You probably went through more water and cleaning supplies than anyone else in the castle, and you definitely needed specialized knowledge about removing stains and odors from clothing and skin. Your personal hygiene routine was necessarily more complex and time-consuming than that of other nobles, because your job put you in contact with substances that could make you a health hazard to everyone around you. The seasonal aspects of this job were probably particularly challenging. Different foods were available at different times of year, which meant the royal digestive system operated differently depending on the season. Spring vegetables might mean one type of challenge, summer fruits another, and winter-preserved foods their own unique set of difficulties. You had to be prepared for seasonal variations in your job duties, stocking different supplies and preparing for different types of situations depending on what the royal kitchen was serving and how the king's body was responding to it. Travel with the royal court presented its own unique set of challenges for the royal butt wiper. When the king traveled, you traveled too, but you also had to somehow transport all the specialized equipment and supplies necessary for your job. This meant packing cleaning materials, spare linens, and various implements for royal posterior maintenance, all while trying to maintain some discretion about what you were actually carrying. And once you arrived at your destination, you had to quickly familiarize yourself with the local facilities and figure out how to do your job in unfamiliar surroundings. The social isolation that came with this position was probably profound. While other nobles could form friendships based on shared interests, common backgrounds, or mutual respect, your defining characteristic was your willingness to handle royal waste. This didn't exactly make you the most popular dinner guest or the most sought-after companion for social activities. People might be polite to your face because of your proximity to the king, but they were probably making jokes behind your back and definitely not inviting you to their private gatherings. You existed in a social no man's land where your noble birth demanded respect, but your job duties inspired disgust. The impact on your family was also significant. If you were married, your spouse had to live with the reality of what you did for a living, and your children had to grow up knowing that daddy's job involved royal bathroom duties. The social stigma extended to your entire family, affecting marriage prospects for your children and social opportunities for your spouse. Your family might live in luxury at court, but they paid for it in social embarrassment and the constant reminder of how that luxury was earned. And then there were the health risks. In an era when disease transmission wasn't well understood regularly, handling human waste put you at risk for various illnesses and infections. You were probably more likely than most people to contract diseases, especially during outbreaks of dysentery, cholera, or other digestive illnesses that affected the royal household. Your job made you a potential disease vector, which meant you were dangerous to be around even when you weren't actively working. The irony was that your proximity to the king, which was supposed to be a privilege, actually made you a potential threat to royal health and everyone else's well-being. The retirement prospects for royal butt wipers were probably not great. Unlike other court positions that might lead to land grants, comfortable pensions, or honored retirement, your specialized skills weren't exactly transferable to other careers. What do you do after decades of royal posterior maintenance? Your entire professional identity was built around one very specific and very personal service to one very important person. When that person died, or when you became too old to perform your duties effectively, you were essentially unemployable in any other capacity. Your expertise was simultaneously highly specialized and completely worthless in any other context. The psychological coping mechanisms required for this job were probably complex and deeply personal. How do you maintain your sanity and self-respect when your primary value to society is your willingness to handle the most undignified aspects of human existence? Some royal butt wipers probably developed a kind of professional detachment, treating it as just another job that needed to be done efficiently and without emotion. Emotion? Others might have focused on the political access and influence that came with the position, convincing themselves that the indignity was worth it for the proximity to power. Still others probably just counted the days until their service ended and tried not to. Think too hard about what they were actually doing. The equipment maintenance aspect of this job was probably more complex than most people realize. The tools and supplies used for royal posterior cleaning had to be kept in perfect condition, ready for immediate use at any time of day or night. This meant regular cleaning replacement and inventory management of items that were probably quite expensive and definitely not easy to explain to suppliers. You had to maintain a detailed understanding of different fabrics, cleaning agents and techniques, essentially becoming an expert in a field that no one else wanted to know anything about. The weather and seasonal considerations added another layer of complexity to an already challenging job. Cold weather might mean the king needed extra time and assistance in drafty bathroom facilities, while hot weather brought its own set of challenges related to hygiene and comfort. Rain might make travel to outdoor facilities more difficult, and different seasons brought different dietary patterns that affected your job duties. You had to be prepared for any weather conditions and any seasonal variations in royal digestive patterns, all while maintaining the same level of service. Regardless of external circumstances, the diplomatic implications of this position were also significant but rarely discussed. When foreign dignitaries visited the court, the royal butt wiper had to somehow remain invisible while still being available for royal needs. You couldn't exactly be introduced to visiting ambassadors as the person responsible for the king's bathroom needs, but you also couldn't be too far away in case you were needed urgently. It required a delicate balance of presence and absence, visibility and discretion that was probably quite difficult to maintain during important state visits. The record-keeping aspects of this job were probably also important but rarely mentioned in historical accounts. Royal health was a matter of state concern, which meant someone probably needed to keep track of the king's digestive patterns, any changes in normal routines, and any signs of potential health problems. The royal butt wiper was in the unique position of being able to observe and document these patterns, but the records they kept were probably among the most closely guarded and embarrassing documents in the royal archives. The training of replacements and assistants was another challenging aspect of this position. How do you teach someone else to perform such an intimate and specialized service? The knowledge transfer process was probably awkward at best and traumatic at worst, involving detailed explanations of techniques and procedures that no one really wanted to discuss, but that were essential for maintaining royal comfort and dignity. You had to be able to articulate the subtle skills and knowledge you'd developed over years of practice, all while trying to maintain some semblance of professionalism about a job that was inherently undignified. The financial compensation for this position was probably significant because it had to be. No amount of money could really make this job appealing, but the salary had to be high enough to ensure that someone was willing to do it and do it well. The king's comfort and dignity were at stake, which meant the position had to be filled by someone competent and reliable, regardless of how much they might personally dislike the work. The royal butt wiper was probably one of the better paid servants in the castle, not because the work was valuable in any traditional sense, but because it was so deeply unpleasant that financial incentives were the only way to ensure it got done properly. The social dynamics within the royal household were probably complex for the royal butt wiper. Other servants might look down on you for the nature of your work, while also resenting the fact that you were probably paid more than they were. Other nobles might pity you or find you amusing, but they definitely didn't see you as an equal. Despite your noble birth, you existed in a unique social position where your birth should have commanded respect, but your job duties inspired disgust, creating a complex web of relationships that was probably difficult to navigate successfully. The impact on personal relationships was probably significant and lasting. How do you form romantic relationships when your job involves intimate contact with royal waste? How do you maintain friendships when your primary skill set revolves around bathroom maintenance? The social stigma of this position probably followed you throughout your life, affecting every relationship and every social interaction in ways that were both subtle and profound. You were marked by your service in ways that could never be completely erased. Even after your duties ended, the legacy of royal butt wipers in history is largely one of embarrassed silence. Most historical records don't dwell on the details of this position, probably because everyone involved preferred to pretend it didn't exist or wasn't as bad as it actually was. The people who held these positions rarely left detailed accounts of their experiences, and the monarchs they served definitely didn't want to be remembered primarily for their bathroom needs. As a result, we know this job existed, and we know it was important. But the day-to-day reality of actually performing these duties remains largely hidden in historical records that prioritize more dignified aspects of court life. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of being a royal butt wiper was the complete waste of human potential it represented. These were often educated, capable, intelligent individuals who could have contributed to society in meaningful ways, but instead were trapped in a position that used none of their talents and all of their dignity. They might have been capable administrators, skilled diplomats, or brilliant scholars, but history remembers them, if at all, as the people who cleaned royal posteriors. Their true capabilities were overshadowed by the unfortunate circumstances of their birth and the particular needs of the monarchs they served. In the end, the position of royal butt wiper represents everything that was wrong with hereditary monarchy and aristocratic society. It was a job that needed to be done, but that no one wanted to do, filled by people who had no choice in the matter and no escape from their circumstances. It combined the worst aspects of intimate personal service with the arbitrary power structures of medieval society, creating a position that was simultaneously essential and degrading, important and humiliating, privileged and cursed. So, the next time you think your job is terrible, remember the royal butt wipers of history. These unfortunate souls who traded their dignity for proximity to power, their self-respect for financial security, and their social standing for the dubious honor of ensuring royal posterior cleanliness, they served their monarchs faithfully in the most undignified way possible, and history has largely forgotten their sacrifice in favor of more pleasant stories about court life and royal grandeur. But they were there behind the scenes, handling the dirty work that made royal dignity possible. And their service, however unpleasant, was absolutely essential to the functioning of the medieval court. They were the ultimate example of taking one for the team, even when the team didn't really appreciate their sacrifice. And history preferred not to talk about what they actually did. The regional variations of this position across different European courts added another layer of complexity to an already challenging job. In England, the Groom of the Stool held significant political power, precisely because of their intimate access to the monarch, sometimes becoming trusted advisors and wielding influence that other nobles could only dream of. In France, the position was more ceremonial, but no less intimate, with elaborate protocols governing every aspect of royal bathroom etiquette. The Spanish court elevated the role to almost religious significance, treating the royal posterior as a sacred vessel that required the most careful and reverent attention. Each court had its own traditions, its own requirements, and its own particular ways of making an already difficult job even more complicated. The German courts often made the position hereditary through specific noble families, creating dynasties of royal posterior attendants who passed down techniques and protocols through generations like precious family heirlooms. Imagine inheriting not just your father's land and title, but also his detailed knowledge of proper royal bathroom etiquette and his collection of specialized cleaning equipment. It was tradition in the most unfortunate sense possible, where family honor was tied directly to your ability to maintain royal cleanliness and dignity during the most undignified moments of royal life. In Italy, the various city-states and papal courts each had their own interpretation of this role, with some treating it as a purely practical necessity, and others surrounding it with elaborate ceremony and protocol. The Vatican version was particularly complex, involving religious considerations about purity, cleanliness, and the sacred nature of even the Pope's most mundane bodily functions. You weren't just cleaning a posterior, you were maintaining the physical vessel of God's representative on earth, which added theological pressure to an already stressful job. The Eastern European courts often combined the role with other duties, making you not just a bathroom attendant, but also a food taster, bodyguard, or personal secretary. This might sound like career advancement, but it actually meant you were responsible for multiple aspects of royal safety and comfort, all while maintaining your primary expertise in posterior maintenance. It was like being a Swiss Army knife of royal service, where your main tool was knowledge of bathroom etiquette, but you also needed to be ready for poison detection, physical protection, and administrative duties at a moment's notice. The Scandinavian approach to this position was typically more practical and less ceremonial, reflecting the generally more egalitarian nature of Nordic societies. But practical didn't mean pleasant, and the long cold winters added their own challenges to royal bathroom maintenance. Imagine trying to provide efficient posterior cleaning services in a drafty castle during a Norwegian winter when the bathroom facilities were barely heated and the cleaning water was constantly threatening to freeze. Your job duties remained the same regardless of weather conditions, but the working environment was particularly hostile to both comfort and dignity. The cultural attitudes toward bodily functions varied significantly across different regions, which meant the social stigma and practical challenges of being a royal butt wiper were different, depending on where you served. In some courts, bodily functions were treated as completely natural and unremarkable, which made your job less socially embarrassing but no less physically unpleasant. In other courts, anything related to bathroom activities was considered deeply shameful and private, which meant you had to perform your duties with even more discretion and secrecy than usual. The linguistic challenges were also significant for royal butt wipers who served international royalty, or, in multilingual courts, you needed to understand euphemisms, polite terminology, and urgent requests in multiple languages, because royal bathroom needs didn't pause for translation services. A misunderstood word or phrase could mean the difference between prompt, appropriate service and an embarrassing international incident. You had to be fluent, not just in the languages themselves, but in the specific vocabulary related to digestive functions, bathroom etiquette, and royal comfort across multiple cultures. The religious considerations surrounding this position were complex and varied by region and time period. Some religious traditions viewed the human body and its functions as sacred, which meant your service was seen as a holy duty requiring special reverence and care. Other traditions viewed bodily functions as base or shameful, which meant your job was seen as necessary but spiritually contaminating. You might need to undergo special purification rituals before and after performing your duties, or you might be required to maintain certain religious observances to counteract the spiritual implications of your work. The technological limitations of different time periods meant that royal butt wipers had to adapt their techniques and equipment as new materials and methods became available. The introduction of new fabrics, better cleaning agents, or improved bathroom facilities meant constantly updating your skills and knowledge to maintain the highest standards of royal comfort. You were essentially working in a field where the technology was constantly evolving, but the basic requirements remained embarrassingly consistent across centuries of human history. The impact of royal health problems on your job duties was probably significant and often unpredictable. When the king suffered from digestive illnesses, food poisoning, or other health issues that affected bathroom functions, your workload increased dramatically, while the difficulty and unpleasantness of your duties multiplied exponentially. You became not just a bathroom attendant, but a medical aide helping to manage symptoms and monitor conditions that were definitely not covered in any formal medical training you might have received. The succession planning aspects of this position were particularly complex when monarchs died or abdicated. Your intimate knowledge of one king's needs and preferences didn't necessarily transfer to their successor, which meant you had to essentially relearn your job with each new monarch. Different digestive systems, different health issues, different personal preferences, and different comfort requirements meant starting over from scratch while trying to maintain the same level of professional competence that had served the previous ruler. The international diplomatic implications were sometimes significant when royal bathroom emergencies occurred during important state visits or negotiations. You had to somehow provide necessary services without interrupting crucial diplomatic processes, while also maintaining absolute discretion about royal vulnerabilities that could be exploited by foreign powers. Your job put you in possession of information about royal health and habits that could be strategically valuable to enemies of the state, which meant you were essentially a security risk just by doing your job competently. The economic impact of this position on royal household budgets was probably larger than most people realized. The specialized equipment, luxury cleaning materials, medical supplies, and replacement linens required for proper royal posterior maintenance represented a significant ongoing expense. You weren't just a salary on the royal payroll. You were the center of an entire economic ecosystem dedicated to ensuring royal bathroom comfort and cleanliness. The cost of maintaining this service probably exceeded the budgets of entire government departments in smaller kingdoms. The architectural considerations for royal residences had to account for your need to provide efficient service while maintaining royal privacy and dignity. Bathroom facilities had to be designed with special attention to accessibility, cleaning requirements, and discreet service corridors that allowed you to appear and disappear without being seen by other courtiers or guests. The layout of royal chambers was probably influenced by the practical requirements of your job in ways that architectural historians rarely discuss in polite academic circles. The seasonal wardrobe requirements for royal butt wipers were probably more complex than those of other court positions. Your clothing had to be easily washable, replaceable, and appropriate for intimate royal service, while also maintaining the dignity expected of someone with noble birth and court access. Different seasons required different materials and different practical considerations, all while ensuring that your appearance remained suitable for someone who might be called upon to attend royal functions immediately after performing bathroom duties. The psychological adaptation required for long-term service in this position was probably profound and poorly understood. How do you maintain mental health and personal identity when your professional life revolves around activities that most people consider deeply private and slightly shameful? The constant, intimate contact with royal bodily functions combined with the social isolation and career limitations of the position probably required coping mechanisms that were entirely unique to this particular form of service. The training and mentorship traditions within this profession were necessarily secretive and highly specialized. Knowledge was passed down through informal apprenticeships and personal instruction that couldn't be documented in official court records or educational manuals. You learned through observation practice and discreet guidance from experienced practitioners who understood both the technical requirements and the psychological challenges of the work. The accumulated wisdom of generations of royal butt wipers was probably extensive, but entirely oral, disappearing. When practitioners died or retired without proper successors, the impact on family dynamics was probably lasting and complex for those born into families traditionally associated with this position. Children grew up knowing that their family's social status and economic security depended on willingness to perform services that other families would consider degrading. The pressure to continue family traditions conflicted with natural desires for personal dignity and career autonomy, creating internal family conflicts that probably persisted across generations. The health and safety protocols for this position were probably more sophisticated than most people realize, developed through centuries of trial and error by practitioners who couldn't afford to make mistakes that might endanger royal health. You had to understand disease transmission, proper sanitation, safe cleaning procedures, and emergency medical response, all while working in intimate proximity to someone whose health was literally a matter of state security. The accumulated medical knowledge of royal butt wipers was probably quite advanced for its time, even if it was focused on a very specific and narrow area of expertise. The retirement and pension arrangements for royal butt wipers were probably inadequate compensation for decades of faithful service in such a demanding and degrading position. Unlike other court positions that might lead to land grants or hereditary honors, your specialized skills didn't translate into valuable post-retirement opportunities you were essentially unemployable in. Any other capacity dependent on royal generosity for survival. After your service ended with no guarantee that your sacrifice would be remembered or rewarded appropriately. The historical documentation of this position is incomplete, partly because everyone involved had reasons to minimize or ignore the reality of what actually happened. Monarchs didn't want to be remembered primarily for their bathroom needs. Royal butt wipers didn't want to memorialize their most undignified professional experiences, and court historians preferred to focus on more elevated aspects of royal life. As a result, we know this position existed and was important. But the detailed reality of daily life for these unfortunate individuals remains largely hidden in historical archives that prioritize more pleasant aspects of medieval court culture. The ultimate irony of the royal butt wiper position was that it represented both the peak and the nadir of court service simultaneously. You had intimate access to the most powerful person in the kingdom, trusted with secrets and responsibilities that other nobles could never achieve, while also performing duties that were fundamentally degrading and socially isolating. You were simultaneously privileged and cursed, essential and embarrassing, trusted and pitied. It was a position that embodied all the contradictions and cruelties of aristocratic society, where accident of birth could trap capable individuals in lives of dignified degradation, from which there was no honorable escape. In the end, the royal butt wipers of history deserve recognition not as figures of amusement, but as individuals who made genuine sacrifices for the functioning of their societies. They maintained royal dignity at the cost of their own provided essential services under impossible circumstances and carried the psychological burden of their unusual duties with whatever grace they could manage. They were products of a system that valued hierarchy over humanity, tradition over individual dignity, and royal comfort over personal fulfillment. Their story is ultimately a cautionary tale about the human cost of absolute monarchy, and the ways that even the most privileged societies can create forms of service that diminish the very people who make that privilege possible. The daily logistics of being a royal butt wiper were probably more complex than anyone who wasn't actually doing the job could imagine. Your entire day had to be structured around the possibility of urgent summons, which meant you couldn't really commit to any other activities or responsibilities with confidence. You might start your morning with plans to attend a court ceremony or meet with other nobles, but if the king's breakfast didn't agree with him, those plans were immediately abandoned in favor of more pressing duties. Your schedule wasn't your own. It belonged entirely to the royal digestive system and its unpredictable demands. The supply chain management for this position was probably a logistical nightmare that required constant attention and forward planning. You couldn't just run to the local market when you ran out of cleaning supplies, because the materials needed for royal posterior maintenance were specialized expensive, and often had to be imported from distant locations. Fine silks from the East. Special oils from the Mediterranean, cleaning agents made from rare herbs and minerals, all had to be ordered well in advance and kept in careful storage to ensure they were available when needed. Running out of supplies during a royal bathroom emergency wasn't just embarrassing. It was potentially career-ending. The weather dependence of your duties added another layer of complexity that modern people rarely consider. Cold weather meant that bathroom facilities were drafty and uncomfortable, making your job more difficult while also making the king more irritable about the whole process. Hot weather brought its own challenges related to hygiene, odor control, and the increased frequency of bathroom visits that often accompanied changes in diet and fluid intake. Rainy weather meant dealing with muddy conditions when traveling to outdoor facilities, while windy weather could turn simple tasks into exercises in damage control. You had to be prepared for any weather conditions and their impact on both the practical and dignified aspects of royal bathroom maintenance. The relationship between royal butt wipers and other medical practitioners at court was probably complex and sometimes contentious. Royal physicians might theoretically outrank you in the medical hierarchy, but you had more intimate knowledge of the king's digestive health than they did. You could observe symptoms and changes that doctors only heard about secondhand, but you weren't medically trained to interpret. What you were seeing, this created a strange dynamic where you possessed valuable diagnostic information but lacked the authority or expertise to act on it independently. You were essentially an unpaid medical observer whose reports might be crucial for royal health, but whose opinions carried no official weight. The security implications of your position were probably more significant than most people realized. Your intimate access to the king during his most vulnerable moments made you both a trusted insider and a potential security threat. You could observe royal health problems that enemies might exploit. You had opportunities to introduce poisons or other harmful substances, and you possessed detailed knowledge of royal routines and vulnerabilities that could be strategically valuable to hostile forces. This meant you were probably subjected to background checks, loyalty tests, and ongoing surveillance that other court servants might not experience. Your trustworthiness was constantly being evaluated not just for competence, but for potential treason. The international aspects of this position became particularly complex when royal marriages involved foreign princesses, or when diplomatic missions required extended stays in foreign courts. Different cultures had different approaches to personal hygiene, bathroom etiquette, and royal service, which meant you had to adapt your techniques and protocols to accommodate varying expectations and standards. A method that worked perfectly in your home court might be considered crude or inappropriate in a foreign setting, requiring diplomatic sensitivity and cultural awareness that went far beyond your basic job training. The technological innovations that occasionally appeared in royal bathroom facilities probably required you to constantly update your skills and adapt your techniques. New types of toilets, improved cleaning materials, better ventilation systems, or enhanced privacy screens all meant learning new procedures while maintaining the same high standards of service. You were essentially working in a field where innovation was constant, but tradition was sacred, requiring you to embrace new methods while preserving old protocols in ways that could satisfy both practical efficiency and royal expectations. The ceremonial aspects of some court bathroom rituals probably added layers of complexity that had nothing to do with practical hygiene and everything to do with royal protocol and tradition. Some courts might have elaborate procedures for preparing the royal bathroom, specific sequences for providing cleaning services, or formal protocols for announcing completion of bathroom duties. You weren't just performing a practical service. You were participating in ceremonies that had been refined over generations and carried symbolic meaning that extended far beyond their obvious practical purposes. The documentation and record-keeping requirements for your position were probably more extensive than anyone wanted to acknowledge. Royal health was a matter of state concern. which meant someone had to keep track of patterns changes and potential problems that might affect the monarch's well-being. You were in the unique position of being able to provide detailed, intimate observations about royal health. But these records had to be kept with absolute discretion and security. The archives probably contained detailed logs of royal bathroom activities that were among the most closely guarded and embarrassing documents in the entire kingdom. The social hierarchy within the community of royal servants was probably particularly complex for royal butt wipers. You outranked most other servants because of your noble birth and intimate access to the king, but you were also performing duties that other servants considered degrading. This created a unique position in the servant hierarchy where your official status was high, but your actual duties were low, leading to relationships with other staff that were probably both respectful and pitying. Other servants might defer to your rank while secretly feeling superior about their own job responsibilities. The impact of royal mood swings and personality quirks on your daily work experience was probably significant and unpredictable. A king who was naturally patient and understanding might make your job merely unpleasant, while a monarch who was irritable, demanding, or prone to sudden rages could make your duties genuinely terrifying. Your performance was constantly being evaluated, not just for technical competence, but for your ability to maintain royal comfort and dignity under whatever emotional conditions the king happened to be experiencing. Bad days for the king meant very bad days for you, with no opportunity to distance yourself from royal. Displeasure. The long-term health effects of your job were probably significant but poorly understood at the time. Constant exposure to human waste cleaning chemicals and unsanitary conditions would have taken a toll on your own health that wasn't considered or compensated for in any meaningful way. You were probably more susceptible to diseases, infections, and respiratory problems than other court members, but medical care for servants wasn't exactly comprehensive. Your job was slowly damaging your health while you worked to maintain someone else's comfort and cleanliness, creating a situation where your service literally shortened your life. The educational requirements for this position were probably both extensive and completely useless for any other career. You needed to understand anatomy, hygiene, chemistry, diplomacy, psychology, and protocol, all focused on the narrow specialty of royal posterior maintenance. You became highly educated in a field that had no applications outside of your specific job, making you simultaneously an expert and completely unemployable. The knowledge and skills you developed over years of service were valuable within the very limited context of royal bathroom attendance, but worthless in any other professional setting. The seasonal menu changes at court probably affected your job duties in ways that required constant adaptation and preparation. Different foods produced different digestive results, which meant you had to understand not just the immediate effects of various dishes, but also their longer-term impact on royal bathroom requirements. Spring vegetables, summer fruits, autumn harvests, and winter-preserved foods all created different challenges and demands that you had to anticipate and prepare for. You were essentially a specialist in the digestive consequences of royal cuisine, with expertise that was both highly specific and deeply embarrassing. The impact of royal aging on your job responsibilities was probably gradual but significant. As kings grew older, their bathroom needs often became more frequent, more urgent, and more difficult to manage. Your duties might expand from simple posterior cleaning to helping with mobility, managing incontinence, or dealing with age-related health problems that affected digestive function. The job that started as merely degrading could evolve into something that was genuinely heartbreaking, as you watched powerful monarchs become dependent on your help for the most basic human functions. The role of royal butt wipers during times of war was probably more complex than most military historians acknowledge. When kings traveled with armies or held court in military camps, you traveled too, maintaining royal dignity and comfort under field conditions that were far from ideal. You had to provide the same level of service while dealing with inadequate facilities, limited supplies, and the constant threat of enemy action. Your presence with military forces was probably seen as essential for royal morale and dignity, but it also meant you were a non-combatant performing bathroom duties in active war zones. The relationship between royal butt wipers and royal spouses was probably delicate and often awkward. Queens and other royal consorts had to acknowledge your presence and service while trying to maintain some sense of privacy and dignity in their own relationships with the monarch. You knew intimate details about their husband's health and habits that they might not know themselves, creating a strange dynamic where a servant had more intimate knowledge of the king than his own wife did. Managing these relationships required diplomatic skills that were never officially taught, but were essential for maintaining court harmony. The impact of religious festivals and fasting periods on your job duties was probably significant and predictable. Different religious observances involved changes in diet-eating schedules and food types that directly affected royal digestive patterns and bathroom requirements. You had to understand not just the practical implications of these changes, but also their spiritual significance, ensuring that your service remained appropriate and respectful during religiously important periods. Your job duties had to accommodate both practical bodily functions and sacred observances in ways that honored both royal dignity and religious requirements. The training of emergency replacements for your position was probably a constant concern that required ongoing attention and planning. If you became ill-injured or temporarily unavailable, someone had to be ready to step in and provide essential services without compromising royal comfort or dignity. Training backup personnel meant sharing intimate knowledge and specialized techniques while maintaining the security and discretion that the position required. Your potential replacements had to be trustworthy, competent, and prepared for duties that were both essential and degrading. The psychological impact of serving multiple monarchs over the course of a long career was probably cumulative and profound. Each king had different personality traits, health issues, and personal preferences that required you to adapt your approach and techniques while maintaining the same high standards of service. Over decades of service, you accumulated intimate knowledge of royal human frailty that probably affected your view of monarchy authority and human dignity in ways that were difficult to process or discuss with anyone else. The economic dependence that developed over years of service in this position was probably one of the most troubling aspects of the job. The high salary and court privileges made it difficult to leave, even when the work became unbearable, because no other position could provide comparable financial security. You became trapped not just by social expectations and royal demands, but by your own economic needs and the lifestyle that your salary supported. The golden handcuffs of royal service were real, making it financially impossible to escape even when the work became psychologically destructive. The legacy issues for families of royal butt wipers were probably lasting and complex in ways that affected multiple generations. Children and grandchildren of people who held this position carried the social stigma and historical embarrassment of their family's service even if they pursued completely different careers. The family name became associated with royal bathroom duties in ways that could affect marriage prospects, business opportunities, and social relationships for decades after the original service ended. Your sacrifice for royal comfort became a burden that your descendants inherited whether they wanted it or not. The ultimate historical irony of the royal butt wiper position is that it represented both the pinnacle and the nadir of royal service simultaneously. These individuals were entrusted with the most intimate aspects of royal care, granted access that other nobles could only dream of, and compensated at levels that reflected their essential importance to royal comfort and dignity. Yet they were also trapped in roles that were fundamentally dehumanizing, socially isolating, and professionally limiting in ways that made their privilege feel more like punishment. They were living contradictions in human form, elevated and degraded, trusted and pitied, essential and embarrassing all at the same time. The royal butt wipers of history deserve to be remembered not as comic figures or historical curiosities, but as real people who made genuine sacrifices under impossible circumstances. They maintained royal dignity at the cost of their own provided essential services that no one else wanted to perform, and carried the psychological burden of their unusual duties with whatever grace and professionalism they could manage. Their story is ultimately about the human cost of absolute power, and the ways that even the most privileged societies can create forms of service that diminish the very people who make that privilege possible. They were the unsung heroes of royal comfort, the forgotten servants of monarchical dignity, and the ultimate example of duty performed under the most trying and undignified circumstances imaginable.